really invite people's engagement. We want to make this as productive as possible. We've got a great set of people working on this, but it's better for us to set priorities if people come in and help us set those priorities.
Well, as a founder that has definitely had sleepless nights in the past working in this space, I would say, because I've always wanted to build here, and so we set up shop here in the U.S., I would just say that I would love an invite. I'd love to come down. Love to chat in person down there in D.C. and join this.
Consider the invitation.
All right.
An open invitation.
There we go.
We would love to come talk to you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Stacks. Bitcoin's trillion-dollar potential is untapped. Stacks unlocks it. Convert BTC to SBTC and earn up to 5% APY in Bitcoin. No custodians, just trustless DeFi. Your Bitcoin working harder. Bet on Bitcoin's future now.
All right, the head of the Crypto Task Force and Commissioner at the SEC, Hester Peirce, back on Coinage. Commissioner Peirce, so good to see you again.
Zach, it's great to be back. I'm going to start with my disclaimer. That hasn't changed. My views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Yes, indeed. And now I've realized I've heard that disclaimer for quite some time. We've been doing this a while now, all the way back to my Yahoo Finance days. I was reflecting on that. I think that was during the pandemic. You took that call in the back of a car. Look at how much younger we looked. It was nice back then. And this is the first interview that we've done since you've become the head of the Crypto Task Force. So I have to congratulate you on this new role. And last time we chatted, it was in December.
I've gone from the back of the car to the front of the car.
It's a big upgrade. Right? And also, in
I'm
that
now
sense,
sitting in the driver's seat. I like it better.
Yes. Well, in this sense, when we think about how much you're doing in the driver's seat, I don't think I even understood when we chatted in December how quickly this would go. So when you think about just like the last few months, I mean, I wanted to ask you what you think your biggest win has been with everything that's played out.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest win is just having the ability to work with the staff in the building towards something productive. And so I don't know that I would point to one specific thing to date. I mean, getting SAB 121 off the books, I think, was certainly helpful. Working our way through some of these enforcement actions has been helpful. And then I think starting the productive process of working with people, getting questions out for people to answer, and we've gotten some great engagement already. I think those are all big wins, and I'm hoping that we can have a big win tomorrow. We have our first roundtable that will be happening, and I think that will be really helpful as well.
It did seem like when you made the announcement for SAB 122 and saying goodbye to SAB 121, it was a little bit of a there was some spice, there was some added spice to that one. It felt like, Commissioner Peirce. Was there anything a little bit extra on there?
I mean, I think there definitely is some. That was reflected a little bit of my frustration over the past several years. It's a really, to me, when I look back, it's really a missed opportunity. We had the opportunity to work on some really difficult and interesting legal and policy issues. And instead, we tried to use our enforcement division to just hammer an industry into a mold that doesn't work for it. That's not even helpful for anyone. And so I think that tweet probably reflected a little frustration.
Well, Twitter, X, I should say, is all about that, I suppose. So it was. I saw it, and I think a lot of people in crypto were like, "Oh, well done." So very interesting to see that all play out. And as we said, things are moving quickly. But I want to look ahead now that it sounds like there are reports that potentially we could see assumed chair Paul Atkins get confirmed as soon as, perhaps, hopefully, later this month. And I'm curious, given how fast everything has played out, what should people expect if he is confirmed for him to come in? Are there things that you're waiting to kind of get done until he's in, and what might those be?
No, we really are moving forward. It'll be great to have him here. He's someone that I worked with before, and really am looking forward to having his input as we think about how to deal with some of these issues. But I think it's incumbent upon us as an agency to continue working. Chairman Ueda, while he's acting, is very supportive of us making progress on crypto issues. And I think the work that we do now can be helpful to the incoming chairman when he gets here to get a sense of where the issues are and where some potential solutions might be. And I think anything that we get done final before he gets here will be helpful for him as well, because he'll have a lot of other things on his agenda.
Well, I've never worked in the public sector, but I assume it's probably similar to the private sector, where you never want to snatch an easy win from your incoming boss, or any boss, really, in that sense. And I think that there were some things that you said you would expect to weigh in on quickly. One of those things being staking via the ETFs that have been approved, Ethereum being one of those examples, I suppose. And I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't happened yet, but that's just my opinion, not speaking for the rest of Coinage or my fellow commissioners either. But I am curious if there is a timeline for that to kind of be considered. That seems like something that potentially you would wait for, I guess.
Well, I mean, as to the question of whether we hold off on things so that Chairman Atkins, assuming he gets confirmed, will be able to take credit. He's not that kind of person. He's not someone who's looking for credit for himself. He really is someone who cares a lot about the issues. He cares about our capital markets. He cares about getting the regulation right, and that's one of the things I really like about him. And so that I can't speak for him, but I don't think that he would be someone who would say, if you can get something done, wait until I get here. No, he'd say, if you can get it done, get it done. But with a lot of these things, even something like where I've said, yes, we're open to the idea that these ETPs, there should be an ability for people to participate in staking or to do in-kind redemptions. There's a process for doing all of these things. We have to consider all of these issues. It's not just turning a switch to turn this on. So I think it's important that people know that there's an openness to these questions. Staking and in-kind redemptions are something that we heard about even as we were approving those. But things do take time.
Then, assuming then that we've already answered that you're not speaking for your fellow commissioners, nor your potential incoming boss, if I were to ask you, Commissioner Peirce, I think technically, which we're going to get into at the end of this interview, your term is up in June, but is it more likely that we see these things, the two that you mentioned, play out ahead of that timeline, or more likely that it is after there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can speak that precisely to the timing. One thing I'll say is that although my term does end in June, there's a provision that allows you to stay on for some amount of time if your replacement hasn't been named. And so there, it's not that I have to walk out the door in June. And I do think there's quite a bit of work to be done. We talked about those two issues, but there are a lot of other issues I'd like to see resolved. And it would be fun to be part of resolving those issues. So I'm not, I still have unfinished work.
Fair enough. It sounds like I will not be holding my breath, or I should be holding my breath for a little bit longer than perhaps June, as I have been on the staking stuff, as we talked about before. So we'll put that.
Well, again, I mean, I really don't want to predict the timeline for that. I do want people to know that if there are, whether it's that issue or whether it's another issue where people think, it would be really helpful to get some quick action, I want people to come and tell us what those items are where they want quick action, and especially if they have a solution of how to get there. Mm-hmm. On the ETP staking point, I mean, clearly we work with people coming in and talking to us about those people who are, the trading venues where those are being offered. That's how that typically works. So, they're working with ETP issuers on those kinds of issues. So again, we welcome people coming in and chatting with us about that. I do want people to know the door's open, but it's hard for me to predict timelines.
For sure. And perhaps even harder for us to cover from the outside and try and think about when these things will happen either. But I always appreciate your take on the details behind the scenes. And I guess to kind of further that point, there has been accelerations in terms of people now trying to interpret the tea leaves as well and file a lot more of these things faster, I think, when it comes to ETFs around crypto. There's even one potentially to talk about in terms of Pudgy Penguins token launched from NFT community. Today we saw an asset manager, Canary Capital, filing for that one. And again, not getting specifically into any one filing, but it does seem like there is a theme of more ETF applications around crypto. And in the past, under Gary Gensler, even for Bitcoin, it was essentially the timelines that the SEC had to act as the thing that forced the SEC to act. And I just get the sense that it's the case now that things might move quicker in that sense, that you guys aren't going to wait for those forced timelines to act. And so is there an acceleration of kind of the way that the SEC wants to handle some of those applications?
Well, I don't know if I'd put it that way, because there is work that has to be done. You've got to look at the facts and circumstances of each application that comes in, and we are getting a lot, which means that the staff that processes those applications is pretty overwhelmed and inundated with work. So there's the practical reality of having to work through those things. We are thinking about what makes sense in terms of how best to process these applications. We want to make sure that we're applying standards that are predictable, and that apply across different types of assets. And so that's something that we're thinking about. How can we make ourselves more efficient, and how can we make it more efficient for people thinking of filing these things, so that they have a sense of what we expect, and therefore have a sense of how to move forward.
Well, let's talk about one area where you have done that very clearly, which is in meme coins. So we can shift to that, because I think, excitingly, it might be the first time for me to play devil's advocate in an interview with you, now that you're in the driver's seat, as you said, and not in the back seat anymore. But I think on meme coins, it was interesting, and I kind of understand where you're coming from in terms of, we've talked for years now, Commissioner Peirce, in terms of libertarian ideals, the idea of not having a nanny state to protect people in the investments that they can now make, and drawing the line of saying the SEC is not going to be the ones overseeing meme coins. And you said that very clearly in the staff note on meme coins. But I do wonder if there's any fear around unintended consequences of doing that, when you then say it's not us, but there's still, other agencies that could. I'm just kind of curious what the thinking was around it, and if there are unintended consequences to potentially see play out.
I certainly think it's good for a regulator to understand its jurisdiction and not to try to act outside its jurisdiction. There are a lot of bad things that happen outside of the SEC's jurisdiction, and a lot of them really give me concern, and I worry about them. But that doesn't mean it's my responsibility to fix them. I have to stick within the parameters that Congress gave me. And so I think one thing we can be helpful in doing, and this is one of the things that I set out, one of the tasks I set out for our task force, which is to say, let's identify areas that are not within our jurisdiction. Another regulator may claim those. They may be within someone else's jurisdiction. They may be in many other regulators' jurisdiction. But let's put it out there. If Congress decides, hey, the SEC would be the perfect regulator for meme coins, they can give us that authority if they choose to. But I think it really doesn't serve anyone well to say, every time bad activity happens, we're going to take action, because that's exactly the kind of thing that leads people to have no idea what the jurisdictional boundaries of the SEC are.
Sure.
And that lack of clarity makes it extremely difficult for people. And so I think it is really, if we were to say, well, yeah, but we see lots of bad conduct happening in the meme coin space, so we'd like to have the SEC there. Well, I can cite you other examples of really bad conduct that you probably wouldn't want to have the SEC regulating, because you can't say just any time there's some kind of thing where you could lose money, the SEC gets to jump in. Yeah. Then our territory our jurisdiction is going to have no bounds at all.
I understand that, but I guess, one of the things is just kind of the flipping of the position of Chair Gensler on the idea of those is not actually all that dissimilar from you coming out and saying meme coins are not under our jurisdiction, because they basically proliferated because it was the only thing that it seemed like was safe from the SEC regulatory crosshairs under his administration. And we saw the proliferation of those. And then we saw a lot of people damaged and hurt in terms of consumer protections from them. And even now with Trump's meme coin and malaise, it was very interesting to see people in crypto basically calling and saying, all right, hold on, maybe Chair Gensler might have had a point around consumer protections and the integrity of markets as well, which I think is a very interesting thing to consider now, because similarly, post-February and the idea of saying meme coins are kosher, or at least that they don't fall under the SEC. It was interesting to kind of see capital formation dry up around meme coins, as if everyone's saying, I don't want to be involved anymore because that's the case. And so that's kind of where my question's coming from. And then as a follow-up question, Commissioner, I wonder if there's any fears that potentially as these things get packaged into potential ETFs, if there could be a spillover effect in the same type of thing that Chair Gensler was always afraid of, which is kind of this idea of investor confidence retreating. Is that fair?
Okay, so there's a lot in that set of questions. First thing, I do agree with you that part of the problem has been that we, as an agency, have made it very difficult to do anything that might potentially be securities related, and that has resulted in people therefore doing things that have actually less value than they would otherwise have done, because they think, oh, the less value things are less likely to trigger the securities laws. And that's terrible. And I think we're trying to get to a place where we actually build a framework that encourages people to do what they think is most useful with their time. And we will try to work with them to address how that interacts with our regulatory framework. So then you raise the question of, well, are you concerned about, investor confidence, market confidence? We do not have the ability to regulate the entire marketplace. We have a job, which is to make sure that the markets that we regulate are operating in a way that investors feel comfortable investing. Of course, with skepticism, right? You always have to make your own decision, and that's the point I'm always hammering home. We never sign off on an investment, even if we had said that meme coins were within our jurisdiction. It wouldn't mean that we're saying we sign off on them, right? That's always a question that we always expect the investor to do her own research. But then we're working on this framework for the markets we regulate. And so when something does fit within it, we are thinking about those kinds of things, which is why when something gets packaged into an ETP, an exchange traded product, we are going to apply the standards. And as I said, we're trying to be very clear with people about what the standards are and have those standards apply across different types of assets. And so I think that should help to protect our markets.
Well, again, shifting from kind of the days, I use the Yahoo interview thing because I'm thinking back to just covering the space to now entering the space as a crypto founder myself, being in the space with Coinage now. It is very interesting to think about that because I reflect on the GameStop saga in terms of when retail really thought like the markets weren't working for them. We saw the House testimony, we saw Roaring Kitty, everyone appear in front of Congress. And I interviewed, at one point, Chair Patrick McHenry on the House Financial Services Committee talking about that. And I just worry if that's the case. Like, are there things that you see now playing out as you let crypto companies come in that you'd be worried about in terms of the same market failures that happened with Robinhood and the idea of the markets with GameStop could potentially happen again if retail similarly feels like this thing that was created to kind of serve them or at least give them evil footing is potentially maybe not that?
Well, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things. Your question, I think, encompasses a lot of different things. One of the things that has looked most promising to me about the technology underlying crypto is the ability to eliminate intermediaries, because intermediaries have been a historical point of failure, a historical point where customers could be taken advantage of either by being told you can't get access to this service or by having the centralized intermediary behave irresponsibly with their funds or their assets. And so part of the promise of the technology is the ability to enable people to avoid intermediaries when they prefer to. But we know that a lot of people will still want to have an intermediary. And so you'll end up with a system in which the infrastructure may well be based on a public blockchain, but there will be someone who retail investors are engaging with directly. And so for those kinds of intermediaries, we probably want to look to our history with traditional financial regulation to see which elements we need to port over to ensure that the same types of problems don't emerge in this area as we've seen in the past, with centralized intermediaries doing other kinds of things. And so I think that's exactly the exercise that we in Congress are engaged in right now, looking to try to figure out what does that right regulatory framework look like. We don't need to copy exactly the framework we have now for traditional equity markets, for example, because we've probably learned from the way we regulate those markets that maybe we don't need that precise and prescriptive of a rule book. Maybe there are things that we can do differently in this space to allow people more flexibility. But what are the essentials of that regulatory framework? So this is an opportunity for us to take the best from what we have, and create a brand new regulatory framework that addresses some of the problems that you're raising in your questions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the problems are ones that we witnessed from the crypto side, like seeing the Terra collapse and the idea of what happened there from the crypto side and market makers being involved, and the idea of what happened with GameStop and market makers being involved. It's very interesting to kind of pair the two and talk about it from a market infrastructure perspective. And I just hope that, as more and more voices that are within the crypto community that are large and maybe represent exchanges, seeing Citadel and some of these other market makers get involved in crypto, you can't help but say, are we about to repeat a lot of the same problems that happened for retail in 21? And I think it's a fair question, but it's definitely one that I know that you and the Crypto Task Force would be well positioned to handle, and you certainly are much smarter than me on those issues. But it's just something that I'm just curious if you're worried about at all.
Well, I mean, I think we shouldn't deny the fact that just because you slap the word crypto on something doesn't mean that problems that we've seen in other areas are not going to crop up here. They could very well. And I think it's also a time for us to remind investors and consumers that, you've got to exercise skepticism when you make decisions about what you're putting your money into. You have to think about whether you can afford to lose that money. You have to think about the risk tolerance that you have and whether this is the right asset class for you to put your money in. Does it match up with your risk tolerance? And so there are a lot of these kinds of things that, again, I agree with you. We can learn lessons from things that have happened in the past, whether in the crypto world or outside the crypto world, that have not gone well, where people have gotten hurt. We can certainly learn lessons as regulators, but we can also remind people out there in the world who are looking to get involved in this as investors or consumers that there are risks, and they have to go in with their eyes wide open.
Well, I know we're running out of time, so I heard your answer earlier on in the interview that it sounds like I can check the box in terms of, I had written down, make sure Commissioner Peirce stays on longer than June. So I'm going to check that box and say we can put that to bed. Beyond it, I wanted to ask you too, just to go full circle. The last question is, things changing so quickly. Obviously, you got a lot done in the first 3 months here, but what is the craziest thing you think most people are discounting in terms of what the SEC can get done before 2025 is over? What would be your biggest win next?
Well, I mean, I think this is where I really need people to come in and help us think through this, but I would like to get some relief out there so that people who have been waiting to do some work in this space can start doing that work even in 2025. And so I think that's where it would be helpful for people to come in and say, this is relief that we could use immediately. We have tools that we can use at the SEC. That's, obviously if what you're asking for requires notice and comment rulemaking, that could well extend beyond 2025. But if there are things that we can do using no action relief or exemptive relief, or guidance, then that is something that we should take into account. And I should note, Zach, that there was also another guidance document that came out today on mining. So I point people to that to take a look at that. And again, really invite people's engagement. We want to make this as productive as possible. We've got a great set of people working on this, but it's better for us to set priorities if people come in and help us set those priorities.
Well, as a founder that has definitely had sleepless nights in the past working in this space, I would say, because I've always wanted to build here, and so we set up shop here in the U.S., I would just say that I would love an invite. I'd love to come down. Love to chat in person down there in D.C.
Well,
and
I
join
mean,
this.
consider the invitation,
All right.
an open invitation.
There we go.
We would love to come talk to you. We've got a portal on our website, which is, if you go to the SEC's website, you'll see the crypto webpage. We've got a place there where you can either put in a request for a meeting or put in a written submission. And we really do want to hear from people and meet with people. So
Awesome.
you're invited.
Well, very good. Coinage invited to DC. That's what we're doing, and we could set this up in person. Commissioner Peirce, I can't thank you enough for the time, as always. Speak for the whole entire Coinage community. Thank you again for the time, and good luck. Congratulations again on everything the Crypto Task Force is doing.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.